So, today we're going to talk about sources of information. More specifically, we're going to compare gaining knowledge from research to gaining knowledge from things like personal experience, intuition, and authority. Let's start with comparing knowledge gained from research compared to knowledge gained from your own personal experience. One important element of knowledge gained from research is the presence of a comparison group. A comparison group allows us to compare what would happen both with and without treatment. So, for example, if we wanted to take a look at the benefits of running with or without a knee brace, how would we do that? If we see benefits increase with the knee brace and no increase without a knee brace, we can be more confident in the actual effectiveness of the knee braces because of the control group, right? The group that doesn't use a knee brace. If we didn't have this control group not using the knee brace, so not receiving treatment, how would we be sure that the increase that we see in the group with the knee brace is actually benefiting from the brace at all, and it's not just some third party confounding variable giving us this difference? So that brings us back around to confounds. Our own personal experience can be a confound itself. Just remember that confounds are extraneous variables that could provide alternative explanations for an outcome. So, for example, did my anger improve because I punched a punching bag, or did it improve due to just the passage of time? Researchers use very careful control measures in experiments to remove all possible confounds from their research. Simply put, you can't remove your own personal experience from existence. It's always going to confound your own personal knowledge. Now, one thing we'll focus on in this course is how to make predictions based on probability. Research itself is probabilistic. Its findings are not expected to explain all cases all of the time, right? It's meant to explain a proportion of the probable cases. Some patients recovered after bloodletting, but we must consider all of the data. We can use the pattern of results to make predictions about behavior based on probability, which again is something we're going to spend a lot more time on once we get into the more statistics focused part of this course. So let's say we're looking at exposure therapy with patients with PTSD. One of the ways that we can use probability to speak on this is by saying that exposure therapy has a high probability for successfully treating patients with PTSD. It doesn't work every single time, all of the time, but there is a high probability for success in treating patients with PTSD. Now, here's a more practical example. Suppose you want to investigate using a laptop or a pen and paper to take notes in class. So think about what your friends do and think about your own experience, right? That decision that you make, which one is better, would be confounded because it has your own personal experience and your friends' personal experiences kind of built right in. But if you go to the research, you may or may not find that your conclusions are correct. More than likely, research exists comparing the two groups and controlling for confounds, including personal experience. Out there somewhere, I'm sure someone has looked at a group using a laptop or a group using a pen and paper, controlled for all sorts of confounds, and determined which is better or more successful or more beneficial for taking notes in class. Now let's talk about knowledge gained from research compared to knowledge gained from your own intuition. We all have intuition, right? Our gut feelings about things. You are unconsciously aware of that source of knowledge, though. You use your hunch about what seems the most natural or most logical to you. However, your intuition is always going to be biased. Let's look at the ways that our personal intuition is biased. So, our personal intuition can be swayed by a good story. So, you need to be able to adjust your beliefs when research contradicts common sense. Just because something seems like the easy or the common answer doesn't necessarily mean that that is the correct answer. There's also the availability heuristic. So, things that pop up easily in our mind tend to guide our thinking. So, for example, splashy headlines, visually salient objects seem more common, or behaviors that are more emotionally taxing seem more common. So, things that make us excited or things that really pull at our heartstrings. There's also the present and present bias. So, failing to consider the absence of something as evidence, right? So, I must be a psychic because I thought of this immediately. We also have things like confirmation bias, which is the tendency to only look at information that supports our bias. So, cherry picking. If you believe in X, Y, and Z, you may ignore A, B, and C when reading. And there's also the bias blind spot. So, the belief that other people fall prey to their biases, but you would never do that, right? Well, even the most skilled researchers and the most skilled thinkers can fall prey to their own biases. So, a researcher is a scientific thinker, right? Consumers of research and producers of research can benefit from learning how to identify and avoid our biases as humans. So, think back to the characteristics that make a good scientist, right? A critical thinker, open minded, willingness to see other perspectives. Researchers come up with comparison groups and they find ways to empirically test their hunches. And they look for potentially disconfirming evidence. So while they're trying to prove a point, they're also trying to prove their point can be disconfirmed, right? Which is something we'll talk about again even more in this class as we move forward. So finally, let's take a look at knowledge by authority compared to knowledge gained from research. Authoritative knowledge comes from those that are respected or even famous, like news anchors, politicians, and celebrities. However, listening to authorities simply because of their position can be misleading and even dangerous sometimes. Blind acceptance is bad. Critical thinking and a knowledge of research methods helps us to question these authoritative sources and determine if we can truly put our faith in what they are saying. We should always question authoritative sources and look into these issues ourselves. So, how do we determine if we should trust the information that's given to us? Well, you should ask yourself these questions. What is the source of these ideas? What is the basis for this advice? Did this person read the research or produce the research themselves? Or are they basing their information on their own experience or their own intuition, which we've already talked about is very confounded? And not all researchers or research is created equally. How can we go about telling the difference? So, switching gears just a bit, we're going to talk about where psychologists publish the knowledge they gain through empirical research. So, first we have things like journal articles, so review or empirical articles in general. Now, these must be peer reviewed, and they're considered to be the most reliable source of information because of the rigorous review process, right? So, no researcher is an island. We take our findings and we put them through to a great deal of other scientists and ask them to critique our work, to find problems, to disconfirm what we have found, to make sure that before we publish, what we are putting out there is good, solid, empirical research. You also have things like edited book chapters, so published research by researchers. This typically explains more theoretical concepts related to their research. It's not a peer-reviewed process, but authors are considered experts in their respective fields. And then we also have things like full-length books written by researchers and, again, experts. Now, when we have a research idea or a research question, you should always start with a literature review. And we're going to talk about what a literature review is and what it can tell us. So first off, what is a literature review? It's a method of searching published studies on a topic or an issue that you want to research. And again, we would look to the sources of information that we just talked about: journal articles, book chapters, scholarly books. And we can gather a ton of information from a literature review or a literature search. So we can ask questions like and answer questions like, has the topic been researched extensively? We can find out key information about the research design. So, what's worked in the past and what didn't work? And we can also look at issues with methodology. And we use the answers to these questions to drive our own method and hypotheses. Now, a literature review can also tell us the most appropriate statistics to use, the information for the research report in general, and it again can show us how we need to produce empirically solvable problems, right? So if we find an error in the research or we continue to come across a question that is unable to be answered empirically, we know that it's not an empirically solvable problem. So let's take a look at a more practical example. So a research question here. Does meditation improve test scores? The theory in question deals with the idea that mindfulness is good for kids. And let's look at what research would surface if we were doing a literature review on this topic. All right, so let's first talk about where we would start. One of the best places is the University of Memphis Psychology Department homepage. You can find library resources there that can help. You would want to search the term mediation in your example, as this is what we're looking at, and you can use the very popular and respected database known as PsycInfo to browse abstracts complete with citations. Google Scholar is also a fantastic research resource for conducting a literature review. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind is to not get frustrated. Literature reviews take time. You have to be patient. They aren't always easy, and they will require you to think and search critically on your topic. So this is an example screenshot from the PsycInfo website. You can see that the keyword of meditation is bolded out throughout the page, and you can find citations and full length text after browsing the abstracts to see if the article would be helpful for your research. And here's a screenshot of a Google Scholar page. So you can see here that on Google we were able to search a little bit more detailed keywords like mindfulness, meditation, academic performance. And again, those keywords are in bold and you can find links to the full text and related citations. So all of these are links to the full text or the PDFs. You can click on the author's names, the citations, the papers that include the articles that you're looking at to see what other people have done with this work in their own research. Now, a word of caution when it comes to literature reviews and sources of information in general. There is a continuum of reliability. So peer-reviewed journal articles are the gold standard, really. Then you have scientific books and popular press outlets like newspapers, online news sources, things like that. And then least reliable of all, you have things like blogs and personal sources of information. So as you can see to the left, these sources decrease in reliability as you move down the list. So your peer-reviewed journal articles are going to be the most reliable, while things like blogs and personal sources of information are going to be less reliable. So just a word of caution as you move through doing a literature review. So now we're going to switch gears just a little bit and take a look at the actual parts of a scientific paper. Like all other facets of scientific research, articles are written and published in a very systematic way that doesn't change much across the board. So you can't just write an article any way you see fit. We have APA regulations that govern how we publish scientific research. And these are the 7 basic parts of a journal article. So you have your title, your abstract, your introduction, methods, results, discussion, and your references. So we like to use an hourglass metaphor when thinking about a journal article. So this is the basic outline of a journal article. When you begin reading, you'll start with your introduction, which is the lit review, the purpose, the hypothesis, which is pretty broad. Then you'll move into your methods. So what was done? What did your subjects experience in your actual study? And this becomes more specific to the actual focus of that article. Then you move into the most specific part of your article, which are the results, right? So the statistical findings related to the data that you collected. And you determine whether or not your data supports your hypothesis. Then you move back out more broadly to your discussion when you are interpreting what your results actually mean. All right, so we start reading a journal article, and first you're always going to see the title and the abstract. Well, the title's pretty self-explanatory, but the abstract is basically a mini summary of the entire paper. So honestly, I find the abstract to be the most difficult to write because you're supposed to summarize each section of the paper in 1 to 2 sentences, which can be really hard. However, this gives the potential reader an idea of your paper without having to read the whole entire thing, which is helpful when doing things like a literature review. Now, this is important because we typically include 20 to 50 references or citations in our own paper, and we've read the majority of each of those papers. And reading the abstract is a great way to determine if the paper is actually worth your time reading. So you may read, 100 to 150 abstracts, but only read maybe 20 to 50 actual papers to include in your article. Now, next we have the method. Next we have the introduction. So you're going to use all the information that you find in your literature search to write your introduction. So this is a broad level description of the topic that includes your literature review and the explicit purpose of your study. And your intro would end with the information on the current study as related to your specific research questions. Then we move into the method, and the method is very specific and detailed. Remember when we talked about transparency in research, how we publish every little thing that we do so that others can repeat or replicate our work? Well, the majority of this vital information is found in the methods sections. So we include a description of our participants in detail, the materials that we use, so the test and instruments, and the research procedures, so the recipe for the experiment, so how every little thing was done in detail. Now, the results are the super statsy parts of the paper, right? So this is the products of the statistical analyses. So after you've collected all of your data, you'll run your statistics and your statistical test based on your research question, and you're going to interpret the results. Now, the results give us a clear idea of what was actually found in the study, what was significant and what was not, where the relationships lie between our variables in our research question and hypotheses. Now, the discussion, the last big part of the paper, is just that. It's a discussion of our current findings and then how those findings relate back to the field. So you restate your predictions, which were or were not supported, you interpret the results, and then you go back and kind of tie in with the introduction, the past research, the theory, the things that you covered in your literature review. Then last but not least, you're going to include all of your references, right? So every single reference that you use throughout the paper. So even if you only use a single sentence or a single idea from a pre-existing journal article, that has to be included in your citations. And those are stated in a very specific way as well. So that's the basics of a journal article, and you'll need to know the basics of each section and what you would find there. So for example, if I asked you where I'd find exactly what materials were used and how they would be used in the study so that I could replicate it, where would you tell me to look? Well, hopefully you'd say the methods section. If I wanted to better understand the theory behind this study and why the authors arrived to their current research question, you would more than likely point me to the introduction, right? Now, if you can identify the major parts of a journal article and know what each one contains, you'll be good to go. All right. And the last part of today's lecture is going to be understanding how we read with a purpose. So now that you're prepared to find and read a journal article and know what to expect, let's look at what it means to read with a purpose. And you want to keep these two main questions in mind. What is the argument And what is the evidence to support the argument? So when you start with any paper, you're going to look and say, okay, what are the authors getting at here? What is their argument? Once you've identified their argument or their main topic within the article, you're going to look for the evidence to support that argument. Now, to answer these questions, you can do a couple of things, and this is just my personal preference and kind of the advice that most research psychologists would give you when reading a journal article to answer those big questions and to read with purpose. So first, you're going to start with the abstract, right? Once you've got a good understanding of what the abstract is trying to convey, you skip to the end of the introduction, right? Read back through the intro for an understanding of the theory, kind of once you get to the end and understand, okay, where are we trying to drill down to before we state our hypotheses? Then you can always go back and read the first paragraph of the discussion section, right? So this kind of gives you a very broad level understanding of how this work relates back to the broader theory at hand. Then you want to go back through the methods and results section. So understand, what did the researchers do? What did they find? Do the results support the hypotheses? And when you go back and read the method and results with a better understanding of what was done from the intro and discussion, it allows you to make better sense of those results, right? And how the materials were used. All right, so now you're familiar with sources of information in APA papers. You're on your way to becoming incredible consumers and producers of research. As always, reach out with any questions you may have, and hope you have a great day.